What's up everybody, I'm Jason and welcome back to another short video looking at some basic to intermediate usage and configuration tips for the Canon EOS R5. In this video, we're going to be looking at the initial Servo AF point for face/tracking option. You'll find this on the top, it's the topmost entry on the AF5 menu page, and it controls essentially where your servo tracking AF, so when you're doing full servo AF, using that full pattern or the full sensor face plus tracking mode, it controls where or how the camera figures out what to start tracking. So there are three options for this setting, although essentially there are three options, but there's only two broad configurations. The two of the options do essentially the same thing from a usage perspective, but behave slightly different in how they interact with your regular single point focusing modes. So the options available are initial autofocus point set for face/tracking. Option number 2 is autofocus point set for spot, single, and expanded, and number 3 is auto. So options 1 and 2 broadly clump together and to do the same thing. If you pick either of these, you'll see a box when you're in area or full face, face plus tracking, the autofocus method of face plus tracking, and the camera is set to servo AF. A box will appear. It typically starts in the center, but it doesn't always necessarily have to be that way, depending on whether or not you're using option 1 or 2, and depending on whether or not you've moved your other AF points around. Essentially, what this box does is it says to the camera, this is what I'm looking at. This is what I want you to focus on. And the camera will then interpret from that box what and how it should track or what it should track. So if it detects a face or an eye, if it detects that you have the box on a face or an eye, it will immediately jump to tracking that whole face or that eye, depending on whether you have eye focusing enabled. Otherwise, it will tend to try and track the object that you're focusing on in question based on color, distance, all of the sort of things that tracking servo AF is supposed to do. The difference between these two options is, as I said, it relates to how the box that you have in the full area tracking method translates to your spot, single point, or expanded autofocus modes. So with the first option set, the position of the box in the face tracking method will not be the same, or will be saved independently of the position of your spot, single, or expanded autofocus position boxes in those modes. So if you move the box in tracking and you then go to single point, that will not move or change the position of the single point box. Conversely, the second option ties the location of these hint boxes together. So the single point box will move with the tracking method box when you move them around. The third option in the menu is auto. And auto is a little bit more it's a lot more complicated, and it's also where this whole process or this whole system dives into the arcane black magic of autofocus systems in cameras. So generally speaking, what the camera will do, instead of waiting for you to tell it, look here to try and focus on something, it will begin immediately processing the image to determine if there are faces in it, or if there are eyes in it, if you have eye focus selection. And if it finds a face or an eye, it will put a broken, or the corners of a box, a broken box around that to indicate that that's what it's going to track. If there's multiple faces and eyes, you can move the box using the multi-controller to the other face or eye that you want to track instead of the one it starts on. And this will be all happening before you even hit the AF on button. If it can't find a face or an eye to track, then it starts looking for basically the same, as far as I can tell, basically it starts down the same process as the one-shot version of the face tracking algorithm, which is it starts looking for the closest subject, or it starts looking for the only subject that's in the frame. Like, for example, if you're photographing a bird or a plane on a clean blue sky, then it will focus on the bird or the plane, instead of trying to focus on the sky, obviously. So that kind of thing. So broadly speaking, options 1 and 2 allow you to tell the camera before you start or as you start autofocusing what you want to track on, where option 3 is where the camera takes a guess at what's trackable, gives you a limited amount of control over what it will track, and then just goes from there. Recommendations. Broadly speaking, I don't have one here. In my experience, and I've used all 3 settings, and I found all 3 settings are appropriate for various subject matters and situations. If I'm working with people, or I'm working in an environment where I'm going to be shooting people with Servo AF, auto works really well. It will automatically start picking faces, and it will automatically start picking eyes, and I have the ability to use the multi-controller to pick the face or eye that I want it to track. This falls apart a little bit when you switch to animals, especially if you step outside of the dog, cats, birds basic limitations that are available or that are in the autofocus system. So if you're trying to photograph bears or buffaloes or gazelles or something like that, the auto kind of falls apart, and you probably want to go to the other modes. However, like I said, there's also, between the first 2 modes, or the other 2 modes, there's also a level of what works best for you. Do you want the point separate from your spot points or your individual points, or do you want everything tied together? You really have to play with it and figure it out for yourself. So I hope this shed some light on the feature or made some sense. If you found this interesting or useful, please consider smashing that like button. Consider subscribing. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.